Charlie Rose is here.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you, Charlie, and a fascinating interview. I just, in seeing this and what we saw last night. Your take on Joe Biden's discussion, specifically of Donald Trump's reaction, I suppose, to the Orlando terror attack. But there seemed to be a sort of meta commentary on the part of the vice president.
Well, what the vice president believes is that, this is a guy who's been around politics and been around foreign policy, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for many years, and now sort of as vice president, knows a lot of leaders around the world, knows a lot of people around the world, knows a lot of people here in the country. And he feels like, that the relationships that this country has used, he feels like the values that this country has stood for, he feels like the kinds of things that have made us who we are as a nation are at risk. They're at risk if we betray our values, and this is his words, they're at risk if we, in a sense, seem to be attacking a religion rather than an extreme version of a religion.
He, the vice president, has, throughout his political career, been on the right side of history on so many important issues, the Violence Against Women Act, just to name one.
Been very eloquent and outspoken about Stanford.
And yet, we see this interview actually conducted hours before the Senate went to vote for theoretically tougher gun measures put on the floor, 2 by the Democrats, 2 by the Republicans, all voted down. And there was a feel of that question that's always asked, what can we do? And then we saw, apparently, the
4 pieces of legislation voted down.
The political will not there to do it.
But we'll have Susan Collins today. I think what he was saying about gun control, he made 2 quick points. One big point was that these assault rifles give you the capacity to kill so many more people. 1 death is too many. But assault rifles give you the capacity to go into a crowd and kill 49.
And it seems like they have a sole purpose, and it's that.
Exactly right. And secondly, he believes, I think, that eventually, now he has believed that for a long time. In 1994, he had legislation that lasted for 10 years against assault weapons. It was not renewed during the Bush 43 administration. So he believes at some point they will, but they have believed this after what happened at Newtown. They thought it would then, that at long last, killing children would say guns are dangerous. Now, I raised the question with him in part of that some people will argue, if someone wants to go kill people, they'll find a weapon to do it. His argument, well, let's restrict what they can find.
It's something that you and I spoke about on your PBS program. I suppose I wondered how we as a society decide what it is we are willing to bear. And he leaned into you at one point in the interview, a piece that we saw of it today, and he said, all politics are personal. There is an emotional connection, it seems, perhaps at this point in time in his personal political career, if nothing else, where he seems very much in tune with a rancorous and confusing time for this country.
Well, I mean, the question everybody wanted me to ask was, is he regret not running? And I did ask that simply because so many people had asked me to ask that. I think I knew the answer. Even if he regretted it, he was not about saying it now. He is full in for Hillary Clinton, will be campaigning for her. Some thought about this idea, his connection to America. One, coming from the middle class that he came from, being a champion of the middle class, being someone who knew the language to talk to working men and women, that he could play an important role, and that if he'd been a candidate, that would have been an important asset to have. He's looking forward. I mean, he's thinking about what his life will be like after the presidency. And the most moving part of this conversation, which I know you probably will refer to, is this bond between him and this president.
I want to get to, in fact, I want to play just a bit of that for our viewers. Speaking of Joe Biden on that bond with the president.
The president and I, we know each other. We talk. We have lunch every week. Probably 60% of the time we talk about our families. He was there for my son. He was the only one when my son was dying that I was able to be completely candid with.
And you could talk to him about
what was going on. I could talk to him, and I felt obliged. I had to let him know what was going on. He was genuinely moved. And Joe, what do you need? So it's a genuine friend. I respect him. He has more backbone, more character than any one person, and there are a lot of presidents of character, than any president I've dealt with, the last 8 presidents. I trust him.
It is a deep bond. I mean, I think he was more emotional about this than I've ever seen him, talking about what it meant. The president was very emotional when he spoke and did the eulogy at his son's funeral. You could see him almost break up there. For him to say, the one person I could talk to is the president about what I was going through as I watched my son die.
And he also acknowledged that even when it comes to policy, and they're in that Oval Office alone, like two friends so often do, they can yell at each other, and they know they can say things. It's interesting. We were talking. I started Robert Caro's A Passage to Power, a biography of Lyndon B. Baines Johnson, and it sets up, does that biography with how put out to pasture really Johnson had been by the Kennedys, by John and by Bobby,
and especially Bobby.
And that relationship, as discussed, seems it's the polar opposite of the one that we see here. And I know you got into policies in the Middle East and whatnot. It's your impression that it's perhaps those bare-knuckled brawls in the Oval Office between two friends that have really had an impact on the president.
I think it really has. I mean, I think he's been someone that the president can come to and say, this is what I think. What's wrong with this? This is what I'm thinking about doing. And he can give him the perspective of having heard all the debates, knowing everybody, knowing exactly what might be coming at him. And it's sometimes changing. I think that he's been a restraining influence on a president, whose principal idea was restraint. He wanted to get us out of war and not get us into any more wars. And here comes a vice president, who's former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and had been doing this for a long time, knew all the world leaders saying, restraint may serve you well.
You really do see the impact from an office that perhaps doesn't always get the credit it might deserve.
Yeah, the interesting question about him, because he's head with a moonshot, because he's had the experience he is, how does one, with his energy and his time, channel that? And secondly, how does a country take advantage of the experience of a Joe Biden?
Well, with perhaps a little more time on his hands coming up, if there's one man to do it, I got to believe
he could do it.
It's Joe Biden.
Yeah. Thank you, pal.
You make us better, Charlie.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Really appreciate it.
See you.